Well, my name is Jerry Gill, and I'm interviewing Elizabeth Rogers today. Is August 1st, 2008. We're in the home of Elizabeth Rogers. I'm a faculty member of the Oklahoma State University Library, and this interview is being conducted as part of the O State Storage Project of the Oklahoma Oral History Research Program. Elizabeth, gosh, you've got a long, decorated history at Oklahoma State University. But I'd like to start off and kind of ask you, first of all, can you tell us a little bit about yourself before, your early life, quote, before Oklahoma State University?
All right. I was born in Chickasha, Oklahoma on December the 21st, 1917. I attended the Chickasha Public Schools and Oklahoma College for Women. When I got ready to start to college, we were in the throes of the Depression, and we didn't have any money. We never felt like we were poor. We just didn't have any money. And I always knew that I was going to go to college. And I was able to get a job, which paid me $20 a month, and board and room at OCW cost $25 a month. My parents, who had moved away by this time, had to dig up $5 a month. Fees were very meager at that particular time. I remember my fees for the first semester at OCW were $18, and that included a fine arts fee because I was a speech major. But I felt that I got a really fine education at OCW. I graduated there in 1939, taught school for a year at Frederick and in junior high, but I really wanted to teach in high school. And I had an opportunity then to go to Perry, where I had high school work. So I moved to Perry, and that's where I met Murl. And the summer before I went to Perry, I went to graduate school at the University of Michigan and had planned to receive a master's degree after several summers. But instead, I got married. I thought I better strike while the iron was hot, while I had him in the notion. And so I never did finish my master's degree.
Well, Elizabeth, can you tell us a little bit about how you met Murl? I mean, the background.
Well, Murl was a teacher at Perry High School. He had attended Oklahoma A&M College and graduated in 3 years, going summer and winter. And in 1940, Mr. Perky, who was head of the vocational program at that time in the state of Oklahoma, assigned him to Perry High School. So I met Murl while we were both teachers at Perry High School, and we weren't supposed to date, but that didn't make any difference. We went ahead and did it anyway.
That school policy.
We'd sneak off to Stillwater and places like that, and Mr. Sprayberry, the superintendent, never knew what we were doing. All the kids knew, of course, but he never did know.
So this was this a school policy at that time?
It was a school policy. I remember when we went in to tell him at the end of the year that we were going to get married, and he said, "Well, who are you going to marry?" And we said we were going to marry each other. And he looked quite shocked. And then he looked at me and he said, "You know that you can't teach school in Perry anymore because they had a policy that married women could not teach in the program. They saved the jobs for the men and unmarried women." So I became a stay-at-home wife and mother.
Well, that's probably an understatement, Elizabeth, but I'll ask you some questions about that
All
later.
right.
So, your relationship with OSU began, of course, with Murl.
With Murl, I said I did not attend OSU. I do not have 1 hour credit from OSU, but I married it.
Well, just generally, I mean, your relationship through the years.
Murl was so wrapped up in Oklahoma State from the very beginning. He loved it. He was a very good student. He was state president of the FFA the year that he was a freshman. He was a college debater and very active in all kinds of activities on campus. He was, and he always loved OSU. Of course, it was A&M College at that particular time when he graduated.
You're now the Rogers clan. Your family is a pretty strong OSU background there. Can you share a little bit about your family?
All of Murl was one of 6 boys. His oldest brother was a farmer and never did go to college. The other boys all graduated with their bachelor's degrees from Central State. And 2 of the boys had master's degrees from OSU. Charles Rogers, who later lived in Pawhuska. Well, he was superintendent of a lot of schools in Osage County, but finally ended up with a tire and supply store in Pawhuska. But he had held a master's degree from Oklahoma State, and his Murl's brother Melvin had a master's degree in history from Oklahoma State. But they were not the older boys weren't that carried away with Oklahoma State as much as Murl was, of course.
What about your family, your kids?
My children, I have 5 children, and all 5 are graduates of Oklahoma State. 7 of my 9 grandchildren are graduates of Oklahoma State. Paul's boys came back from California to attend Oklahoma State. So Jessica, Philip's daughter, is a graduate of the University of Illinois, and Mark, Ruth Ann's second son, attended the University in San Diego and also the University of Colorado, but never did graduate.
Well, Elizabeth, through your participation in the Alumni Association through the years, especially class reunions, you met many of the early graduates of Oklahoma State University.
Yes, I'd like to tell you about that. Murl moved to Stillwater in March of 1955. He had been selected by a board, first by a committee of the board of directors of what was known then as the Former Students Association of Oklahoma A&M College. And I remember 2 of the men that were on that committee were Jay Hesser, who now lives in Stillwater and is still alive, and Ed Roberts, who lived in Cushing. I think there were 3 other members of that committee, but they made a recommendation to the board, and it was narrowed down to 3 candidates, Jack Boyd and John Connor. And they were all 3 very good candidates, and they were interviewed by the whole board, and Murl was selected. He came to Stillwater in March and lived in Bennett Hall. He did not move the family here until May because John and Ruth Ann were both in school, and we thought it was better for them to finish the school year. He had rented a house that John Hamilton, who was head of the print shop, had lived in, and down on Duncan Street. And we moved in there in May. And the first thing that happened to me was I was plunged into class reunions. The Half Century Club met every year. The Half Century Club was made up of all the graduates who had been out of Oklahoma A&M College for 50 years. And they came back every year for the reunion. It was very important to them. And I will say this, that I knew somebody from every graduating class of Oklahoma A&M College and OSU. Even the first graduating class had 6 graduates, and Mr. Gerald of the first class came back that first year in 1955 for that first time that I helped with class reunions. And the early classes, I knew Jessie Thatcher Bost, who was the first woman graduate. She was a lovely woman. I knew the members of all of the classes that came back for class reunion, and somebody from every one of those early classes came back. And they came year after year. And it was really interesting. It got to the place that I remember they would want to be the oldest one present. It was very important. They'd look around when they came to see if they were who was the oldest, because that was quite a distinction. But they were wonderful people. And do you want to hear my story about the class of 1916?
Absolutely, absolutely.
Well, I remember one year the class of 1916, of course, was here, and we had a member of that class who, well, wait just a minute, whose name was Sexauer. Her last name was Sexauer, Sexhauer. That was her maiden name. And so these old graduates often would come several days ahead of time, and they would make a nuisance of themselves coming into the office while we were trying to get ready. I always had to help. I was up there working one day, and this old man who had come in early leaned over the desk of the head secretary and said, "Do you have a Sexauer here?" And the secretary, Betty Hodnett, who was quite a card in her own way, said, "Sexauer, man, as busy as we are, we don't even have time for a coffee break." I was there, and it happened. I was very careful not to tell that story as long as this particular alumna lived, but it made a good story later on. But these were wonderful people, and I was happy that I had the opportunity of knowing all of them.
Elizabeth, these people had strong feelings, didn't they?
They had very strong feelings. During the 60s, when there was so much terrible unrest, Dr. Winters, who was actually the founder of the Soil Conservation Service, that had served all over the world and was a wonderful alumnus and had retired in Stillwater, came into Murl's office one day, and he said that the Half Century Club wanted to pass a resolution protesting the fact that one of these big protesters was coming to the campus to make a speech, or had come to the campus to make a speech, and they wanted to protest the fact that he was allowed to come to the campus to make a speech. And Murl didn't want to cause any trouble, and he said, "Well, now that's over and done with, Dr. Winters. Let's just let it pass. That I don't think you want to really pass a resolution about that." And he finally convinced him. Well, at the big banquet that night for the Half Century Club, they had about 200 people there. It was a large banquet. I think they held it in the Oklahoma room. But anyway, Dr. Winters was giving the invocation, and he asked the Lord to forgive the university for allowing this protester to come to the campus to make a speech. And I thought that Murl and I would absolutely break a split. We could hardly stand it. We got so tickled. But he made his point.
Well, Elizabeth, you observed, more than a half century of observing alumni relations at Oklahoma State University, and you alluded to how loyal those early alumni were. Did you see any change in that over the years? Or do you think?
Well, I think
strongly about their alma mater as they used to.
I guess for me, all the time that Murl was here, we were having the reunions. We gave gold pins to the 50-year people when they came back for their 50-year anniversary, and we gave silver pins for the 25 years. I'm sure the classes were smaller in the early days, and it was possible, for them to know each other. But as the college grew, then it was difficult to get people together that knew each other, and so then I guess it finally was not continued. But those first years, the class reunions were very important, a very important part of the alumni program, very important. And I don't know, I think the alumni today are loyal. I think they're very loyal to the university. I'm sure they are. But we had so many friends among the alumni board, and they were so dedicated. Murl was so fortunate in the board members that he had. And I could talk a lot about some of those early board members who supported him so well during those early years.
Well, this is what kind of picking up on your conversations about loyalty and relationship with alumni of the university. How important do you think Alumni Association is, and what do you think is the role of Alumni Association in connecting alumni at the university?
Well, I think it's very important, and we had the cooperation in the Alumni Association with the presidents of the university. Of course, when we came here, Dr. Wilhelm was the president. He had succeeded Dr. Bennett, who was president during Murl's time as a student. Dr. Wilhelm had been Murl's advisor when he enrolled at Oklahoma State, and Murl had a wonderful relationship with Dr. Wilhelm. He never came to the student union that he didn't drop by the alumni office, poke his head in and have something to say. He cooperated in every way. And Murl had a wonderful relationship with the vice presidents and the deans. In the early years, when he went to alumni meetings, he had the deans as speakers to alumni in various counties, and they would go. He would take them in his car, and they would go to alumni meetings. Dr. Comm went with him often, and Gene Swearingen went with him. He had wonderful cooperation from the deans, the vice presidents, and the presidents. When Dr. Comm became president, I was president of Lahoma the year that Dr. Comm became president. Excuse me, I better answer that, and I'll put them off. All right, now we can go on.
All right.
I'm sorry if we
No,
interrupted.
that was a question I was going to ask you. You sort of lead into. I wanted to maybe wrap on to your question, your comments about the presidents. Any can you give us sort of personality highlights that you dealt with, and Dr. Bennett, on or Dr. Wilhelm? Your thoughts on different presidents and through the years when you were there and since?
Well, I don't want to be negative, but Dr. Boger was never in Murl's office. But all the other presidents, he had a wonderful relationship with. But I don't know whether he just didn't think the Alumni Association was that important or what. But anyway, that was true.
Do you have a favorite? Past president?
No, I was very fond of all of them. They were good friends. When we first started traveling on our trips, Dr. Wilhelm was very interested, and he gave us a lot of good advice because he'd traveled all over the world. Told us to take some kind of pills to put in our water, to be sure that we wouldn't get sick, and gave us very good advice about it. And I remember we were going around the world, and Mrs. Wilhelm called me and said, "I hope you're not going to that awful place." And I said, "What awful place?" And she said, "Calcutta." But we didn't go to Calcutta when we went to India. But anyway, we had a wonderful relationship, and especially with Dr. Comm, because the year that I was president of Lahoma, of course, we worked very closely with Dr. and Ms. Comm. We went down to Okmulgee, with them and so forth. But Murl always had a wonderful relationship with the presidents, and they seemed to appreciate what the Alumni Association was doing. I might say this, that the Alumni Association, when Murl came, was operating on just a shoestring, and higher education was not well funded at all. And so he was very interested in trying to get more funding out of the legislature. And he had Scott Orbison was living in Enid at this particular time, and he was president of the Alumni Association. And Ralph Ball was living in Oklahoma City, and they were two of the strongest supporters that Murl had at this particular time. But I remember that Murl decided that they were going to have to lobby the legislature in order to get more money for higher education. And so Murl would meet Scott. He would drive west on 51 at an intersection over there that went directly down to Oklahoma City. He would meet Scott, and all the way down to Oklahoma City, Murl would brief Scott on statistics, and Scott did the presentation before the legislature, and then they would come back and they would do it over and over again. And I do think they had a good influence in getting more money. And then, of course, Murl organized the Higher Education Alumni Council. And he had great cooperation from the alumni director at OU and also an alumna from Oklahoma College for Women named Dorothy McGregor. The three of them actually were the ones that organized the Higher Education Alumni Council. And it worked to get money for higher education. That was its purpose, trying to get more money out of the legislature for higher education. And it was successful. They did increase the amount of money that was given to Carter Bradley became the executive director of the Higher Education Alumni Council. He was a graduate of OU and a really fine man, a newsman who had worked in Washington for UPI. And Carter is still living, and if you ever interviewed Carter, you'd get a lot of information. He lives in Oklahoma City.
Mel Jones was pretty active.
And Mel Jones was, oh yes, Mel was a wonderful help in every way. Mel and Mary traveled with us on a number of our alumni trips too, and Mary would be able to tell you a lot now, even though Mel probably couldn't. But they were very, very active. When Murl retired, Mel called me on the phone one day, and he said, how would you feel if we raised a President's Distinguished Scholarship to give Murl upon his retirement? Give the scholarship in his name. And I said, oh, Mel, you'll never be able to raise $25,000. He said, you just watch me. He said, I'm the best money raiser you ever saw. And I know he raised over $33,000 for that scholarship, and they presented it to Murl when he retired. But Mel was always so supportive of the Alumni Association. As I could just mention a person after person. I don't remember that Murl's board ever crossed him in anything, in any of his innovative ideas that he came up with for the Alumni Association. They would take the ball and run with it. And he had wonderful support from his alumni boards all through the 25 years that he served as alumni director. I can't say enough about these men and women too. I remember women like Virginia Lippert, who was on the board, supported him so well down through the years. They were wonderful and became some of our very best friends.
Elizabeth, just one of the questions I was going to ask you, while we just pick up on that, is you named some of those names. Can you highlight some of the individuals served as past presidents and Alumni Association actively involved, and some of the things you remember about their personalities and their contributions?
Yes, there were, as I said, Ralph Ball thought big all the time. Where some of them worked for very small salaries in their own jobs at this particular time, Ralph had a lot of money. He was president of HTB, big architectural firm, and he thought big, and he wanted the Alumni Association to think big. And he saw to it that Murl got a raise every year. When we came to OSU, Murl's salary was $6,000 a year, which we thought was pretty good since we'd made only $4,800 when he was manager of the Chamber of Commerce in Hugo. But Ralph saw to it that every year Murl received a raise. But he never made over $40,000 a year in all the 25 years that he served. And we lived sort of a hand-to-mouth existence, but we always made it through. My problem was getting him to put in for his mileage reports and get his mileage checks back. But of course, they paid him mileage for all the miles that he drove. I remember when we first came here, when he first came here, even before we moved here, he wanted to meet the alumni. And so he spent most of his time traveling to different alumni clubs all over the state. And I remember he told me about going to one in West Texas. He came in March, and they had set up this meeting in West Texas, in the Texas Panhandle. I can't remember what town it was. But anyway, he encountered a big snowstorm on the way out there and just barely made it to the meeting, and found out they'd called off the meeting because of the weather when he got there. But he was very eager to meet all of the people, and that's what he did during those early days.
You mentioned Ralph Ball.
Ralph Ball was one of his main supporters, as I said, and Joe Scott. I don't think Joe was ever president of the Alumni Association, but he was quite wealthy, and he was president of a big insurance company in Oklahoma City, and he was one of our most loyal supporters in Oklahoma City. And then when we started the alumni banquets for the banquets for, first of all, for high school seniors, and then they determined that it was better to catch them while they were juniors, and they started having them for juniors. But some of our banquets for these honor students were so very important in getting students to come to Oklahoma State. And Jim Cobb, I remember, in Oklahoma City, was one of our very best workers in the Oklahoma City Club, and helped so very much with those banquets. And I know my own daughter-in-law said that she had not even thought of attending Oklahoma State until she was a guest at one of those banquets. And then later, after she married Charles, they became big workers in helping set up those banquets in Oklahoma City. And Murl always had good programs. And I want to tell you one thing that was done in those very early days. He filmed the Varsity Review, and those films should be on file in the library. I don't know whether they are still available or not, but we had some excellent Varsity Review programs. I remember one year the Chi Omegas had a special skit that was just very, very good. And he filmed these and then would take the film out for programs for alumni. And another thing he did, and these films should be on file in the library, he made films about the university. And he made at least two that I remember. I wrote the script for the first one. And he interviewed various people on the campus and photographed the homecoming parades and all various activities and football and sports and all of that to make people want to come to Oklahoma State. And those films were very good films as far as, and helped with recruiting also, helped with recruiting students. And I think they're probably still on file. They were for a long time in the library.
Elizabeth, there's a lot of, you mentioned the student recruiting honors banquets, you mentioned the EACO. Could you, in addition to those, some other highlights that you recall, some innovative programs that Murl put in place during his years?
Well, he started the foundation, actually. It was called the Alumni Achievement Fund. And one of the first things they did was to raise money for scholarships so that they could offer, and the Alumni Association had a committee, the board had a committee appointed to award these scholarships. And it happened one time I happened to be working at the office, which I did. I was part of the free labor, and I was up there and I was sitting in on this meeting, although I had no reason to be in there, I guess. But they were reading the letters of application for the scholarships. And I remember one in particular that came from a girl in Oklahoma City named Tony Acosta. And Tony Acosta lives in Stillwater now, and you should interview Tony. She had the most wonderful application letter, and she told how her mother was a widow and took in sewing in order to support her. And then she told about all the activities that she participated in her high school and how badly she needed to come to college and so forth. And I remember one, I believe it was Scott Orbison, that said, I don't care who else you give a scholarship to, but that girl is going to get a scholarship. And she received one of the early scholarships. And you could interview Tony Acosta Stone. She married a trackman named Stone, and she lives in Stillwater right now. She works as a volunteer at the hospital. She's been president of the hospital auxiliary. She's a wonderful young woman.
You said Stone, I know that name.
Yes, and she received one of those first alumni scholarships.
So, Elizabeth, what we now know is the OSU Foundation today didn't really come out of that alumni achievement.
It came out of that. It soon grew to the extent that it needed to be a separate entity. That just as the Alumni Association became too much for Mr. Martin to handle with the Placement Bureau, so the foundation, the Alumni Achievement Fund, became too much for the Alumni Association director to handle, along with his other duties. And so they decided to make a special entity of it and call it the foundation. And Robert Irwin became the first director of the foundation. And his office was on the other side of the alumni office there. They shared a receptionist.
So the Alumni Association then started the career, what's now known as, it was in place, University of Placement, now Career Services, and then also started the OSU Foundation.
Yes, yes. And then high school, I suppose some of high school and college relationship grew out of it too, but there was close cooperation between the association, the Alumni Association, and high school and college relations. Russell Conway worked very closely with Murl. I think you worked with Russell at one time too. And Murl had a wonderful relationship with high school and college relations. And then after the foundation moved out of away from the alumni office, then the Placement Bureau moved into that office. And Murl had a wonderful relationship with the people there too.
Elizabeth, what did I know you have some great travel stories. The travel program, Murl was one of the innovative programs he started, wasn't it?
Yes, our first trip to Europe was in 1962. And I remember that he came home one day and I was fixing dinner. And he came in the kitchen and said, we're going to Europe this summer. I thought he was crazy. I didn't even answer him. We were having a hard time making it from one paycheck to the other, and the idea of going to Europe was just impossible. And I said, it's almost time for supper. And he said, no, I'm serious. We're going to Europe this summer. And I said, go get the kids. I didn't even answer him. So after supper, we sat down here at the dining room table, and he explained to me that other alumni associations in the Big Eight were taking their alumni on international trips. And we were going to do it too. He was going to organize it, and we would get our trips paid for by organizing the trip and leading the trip. So then I became enthusiastic about it, of course. And Philip was only 5 years old. Ruth Ann was 20. And we were going to go to Europe for 3 weeks. We had a chartered airplane. Arlie Nixon, who was an OSU graduate, was the pilot. He worked for TWA. So we chartered an airplane from TWA. We were the last propeller-driven airplane that crossed the Atlantic for TWA. And of course, it took a lot longer in a propeller airplane. We charged $750 for 3 weeks in Europe. 3 meals a day, hotels, all of the arrangements, and naturally, a whole lot of people wanted to go. Some 85 people, I think, signed up, 10 of whom just wanted to ride over to Europe and back with us, and then they would go their own way. I know Al Darlow took his whole family, and he was one that didn't go all the way around with us, but met us back in Paris to come home together. But they were standing in line to get on that airplane to go, and it was a wonderful trip. We flew, of course, to England. Well, we stopped in Ireland, I remember, and then for fuel, and then went on over into England. And then we went into Holland and Germany and Italy and France. It was a wonderful trip. We went to places that Murl particularly wanted to go. That's where we always went. Once in a while, we had people that asked us to go certain places, and he would incorporate that in the trip, like the time we went to the Galapagos Islands, because Mary Louise Higgins particularly wanted to go to the Galapagos Islands, and I'm so glad we included it in our trip to South America. But and we went to Israel the second time because Bob Alley missed the trip the first time and wanted to go to Israel, so we went to Israel the second time. But we had many people that went on all of our alumni trips. We became an alumni family in a way.
Elizabeth, you're going to pick up a story. When was the infamous train, incident with Murl and the police in Germany? Was that on that first trip? Was that later?
That was the first trip. Well, it happened in this way. We were had been in Italy, and the train went on around into France. On that particular trip between Italy and Nice, France, one of the alums came up to Murl and said, "There's no water in the bathroom on the train." They found that out as soon as the train started. And so he confronted the conductor about getting water on the train. And that was what the problem was about. And the French are very volatile people. And anyway, when they got to France, the argument ensued, and I don't remember just what happened, but it was over water on the train. And we had two German guides that were going with us on all of the trip, Gerhardt and Renata, a man and a woman. And Gerhardt was trying to argue with the man, too, over the water on the train. And that was the incident. And anyway, they put Murl off the train at Nice, and also Gerhardt and Murl, they put off the train. Well, we had a lady on our trip, Mrs. Afanasiev, Eugenia Afanasiev, whose husband had been a faculty member here, and she spoke fluent. They originally from Russia. She and her first husband had fled from Russia, and her husband was killed during the Russian Revolution. And anyway, they were white Russians. Excuse me. All right, now. So Murl was put off the train. So then the conductor wanted the tickets. And Eugenia, who spoke very fluent French, went up to him and said, "You put the man off the train that had the tickets. You knew they had the tickets, and you put them off the train." So we were on our way to Paris. And they let us eat in the dining car, and they knew we had the tickets. They knew that we were legitimate. But I had no idea what had happened to Murl or what was going to happen to him, because they took him. They had two gendarmes with automatic weapons behind him, with him and the last I saw, they were going down the railroad track toward the station with two gendarmes with machine guns pointing at their backs. And we were on our way to Paris. So I was kind of upset, naturally, about what the situation was going to be. So all the way to Paris, and it took several hours on the train, I wondered what on earth was going to happen. A funny thing happened. Dorothy Dabney was awfully upset about it. She was from Vernon, Texas, and she was traveling with her two girls, and her husband didn't go. And she was ready to call her husband in Vernon, Texas, to see if he couldn't do something about that. And she said, "Oh, what do you think is going to happen to Murl?" And Pug Griffin said, "Oh, they'll just probably put him in jail or send him off to the Foreign Legion." He always had a joke for everything. But anyway, when we landed in Paris, the first thing I saw was Murl. And this is the only time that he had traveled on this trip that he didn't wear a white shirt with a necktie. And there he stood in a sport coat, a sports shirt, with the funniest looking necktie on I ever saw in my life. And I got off the train, and I remember saying, "Where did you get that necktie?" Instead of saying, "Oh, what happened to you? How wonderful it is to see you." And I remember Juanita Noel, who was head of clothing, textiles, and merchandising, who was traveling with us at the time, said, "Well, why didn't you run up to him and throw your arms around his neck and tell him how glad you were to see him? You said, 'Where did you get that necktie?'" They wouldn't let him on the airplane to fly to Paris without a necktie, and that was why he had on that funny looking one. But he said when they got into the railroad station, when the gendarmes took him in the railroad station, and he explained the whole situation, they apologized to him and saw that he was able to get on an airplane and meet us in Paris. So that was what happened. They apologized. They said it was an Italian train, and therefore the French didn't have anything to do with it, and so forth. But anyway, that was the story. And there wasn't anything bad that happened.
Well, speaking of Murl, there's dozens of Murl Rogers stories, but in some ways, Murl is so synonymous with the Alumni Association of Oklahoma State University to thousands and thousands of alumni. Could you tell us a little bit of I know it's probably difficult from a personal viewpoint, but your perspective on Murl's role in the Alumni Association, what kind of person Murl was, his personality. Could you share with us a little bit about that?
Well, he loved his work. I think he was really made for it. I don't know. At least that's what Ira Armstrong told him when he told him he should apply for the job. He said, "This job was just made for you. You need to." Murl loved people to begin with. He liked to work with people, and he had an ability of being able to work with people. And from the time he started working with the alumni, he loved the alumni. He looked forward every morning to going to work. He was at his desk at 8 o'clock every morning, no matter what county he was in the night before. He always made it back so that he could be at his desk and ready to go the next day. He looked forward to every day that he worked in the Alumni Association. Yeah. He just really thrived on it. And he was always trying to think of new ways that he could serve the Alumni Association. He always looked upon himself not as a leader, but more as one that was serving. And he tried to put his presidents forward always. He had so many fine men, particularly, that were president. I think during his tenure, they were all men. I don't remember any women there were many women on the board, but I don't remember any that served as president. But they were all such fine people and easy to work with, and very supportive of all of his ideas when he would come up with something that he wanted to see. He established the Hall of Fame, for instance. That was another thing that was established.
The top 10 graduating seniors award.
And yes, we gave we honored the top 10 graduating seniors. We honored the top teachers. We then honored the top graduate assistants, did all of that. That was very important. All of those things were done. He was, and I don't think we mentioned did we talk about the train trips that we took?
No, the sport. There's one of the questions I'm going to ask you. Let's just go into that. There, in your relationships with the athletic department, of course, and the alumni.
Yes.
Was very close. And
very close. Yes.
Could you share a little bit about some of those activities?
All right. Well, in the beginning, we went to Arkansas every year, to Little Rock. As far as the University of Arkansas was concerned, they considered a game played in Little Rock as an away game if it wasn't played in Fayetteville. So every year we had to go to Little Rock for the football game. And I remember that the first year we had a black player on our team, Chester Pittman. Cliff was the coach. Cliff Spiegel was the coach. And the hotels in Little Rock were not going to allow Chester to stay in the hotel with the team. And Cliff bowed his neck and stood his ground, and he said, Chester is going to stay with the team or we will not stay in your hotel. And the only hotel that would allow Chester to stay in with the team was the old Lafayette Hotel. And so the alumni stayed there too. And it was a very good relationship. And then the same company built the Camelot Inn, and then we moved to the Camelot Inn. But the alumni always stayed where the team stayed. And Clay Potts always had a barbecue for the alumni on the Arkansas State Fairgrounds, which was near War Memorial Stadium. And the night before the game, we had a big barbecue with Clay Potts there, and the alumni came to that. And we always took a group of alumni every year that we went to Arkansas. We had an alumni group that went to Arkansas. And I remember one really interesting story when we had moved to the Camelot. The coach who later became, the boy who later became the coach there at the University of Arkansas, what's his name that just left?
Terry Don Phillips.
No, I mean the coach at Arkansas.
Jimmy Johnson.
No, I'm the Arkansas coach, the football coach that just left the University of Arkansas to go to Mississippi.
Oh, I'll think about it in just a minute. Sure.
His father played basketball for Mr. Iba. And why can't I think of it? Houston Nutt. Oh, how can I think of it? Well, Houston Nutt Sr. was completely deaf, but he played basketball for Mr. Iba. And we were there at the Camelot, and Houston Nutt Jr. was playing football for the University of Arkansas. He was on the team as a freshman. And Houston Sr. came up to Murl and said he could communicate, he could read lips, and we could communicate with Houston Sr. just fine as long as he could see our faces. And he said to Murl, come into the coffee shop, I need to talk to you. So Murl and I went into the coffee shop, and Houston Sr. said, Houston is unhappy at the University of Arkansas, and he wants to transfer to Oklahoma State. And would you speak to the coaches and tell them that Houston wants to transfer? And so Murl said, well, yes, I'd be real glad to talk to the coaches. I have a really good relationship with the coaches. And so he did, and we didn't think any more about it. And the first thing we knew, Houston Nutt Jr. was at Oklahoma State and became the quarterback for Oklahoma State. But that grew out of that time that we were there. It probably would have happened anyway, but that's a story that happened there.
We may be getting close to our time. What are we showing the camera?
51.
If you want to go ahead and we'll pick up our interview again with Elizabeth Rogers. Elizabeth, we're talking about Alumni Association activities around athletic events, and you were telling some stories about Arkansas, and then maybe mention a little bit about some of your other travels.
All right. We always tried to take about 2 alumni to about 2 out-of-state football games. And I remember one of the early games that we went to was in Denver when we played the University of Denver. And we took all of our children that particular time, which was very unusual. And then later we went to various other colleges. I remember one year we went to the University of Nebraska, and it was terribly cold, and we had to stay in Omaha because there was no way we could get rooms for our alumni in Lincoln because of the support that the University of Nebraska has with Nebraska alumni. So we stayed in Omaha and had to bus to Lincoln. And all the buses had already been signed up for Nebraska friends and supporters. And we had to ride the awfulest old rickety school bus from Omaha to Lincoln. And our seats were not particularly good. They weren't in the end zone, but they were almost in the end zone, and they were very low. And we had our band there. Charles was in the band that year, I remember, and he went with the band. But one thing I particularly remember was that sea of red, of course, in the stadium. And we were close to the end zone, and the bleachers were built pretty high, and underneath the bleachers was this hog wire stretched across underneath the bleachers, and people had paid to stand under there to watch the game. And that made a terrible impression on me in that cold, and it was sleeting, and the weather was just terrible. And of course we got beat. But I remember how nice the Nebraska fans were to us. We were always well treated by Nebraska fans, whether they came to Stillwater or whether they were there in Lincoln. I liked the Nebraska fans. They were good people. But you wanted to know about some of our other trips. Our football trains were 2 very distinctive times. Our first football train was to the Astrodome in Houston. The Astrodome was new, and everybody wanted to go to the Astrodome. We had 868 people on the football train. And that year, Murl and I did not go to Arkansas. We sent Leo Elwell, who was Murl's associate, with the group that went to Arkansas because Murl and I were making packets at the office to give to each one of those 868 people that were going to be on the train. Each packet contained his football tickets, his train ticket, his hotel reservation, the number of the bus that he was going to ride when the buses met us at Houston, and other information. And we had to fix all of that ready to go for the next week. And so we did not get to go to Arkansas. Well, that year, of course, we won big at Arkansas. And I remember that the alumni who were on the trip bought Murl a hog that was a large hog on its side, razorback, with a whole bunch of little pigs. And on the hog, they had printed the score. And I still have that hog and those little pigs that were brought to us because we won that particular year in Arkansas. But we didn't get to see it because we were filling the seats for the football train. And then we went to Austin another time, and that was when Walt Garrison was playing, and I believe that he made the only touchdown for us in that game. But Walt was a very good player, and we all enjoyed watching him play. But we always tried to take alumni on usually regularly scheduled airlines, and we would reserve a block of seats. And I know we went to Colorado several times, and sometimes we'd bus from Denver to Boulder, and we'd have box lunches and everything on the buses for them and so forth. But our trips to Colorado were always a lot of fun, and we went to many other places too.
Getting back to earlier part of our conversation, Murl is still, if I can introduce my question with a comment or a story. In my years in the Alumni Association, we had the Murl Rogers Award, and there was someone who really went above and beyond and worked a whole lot of hours. And Murl was almost legendary in the way he worked, his work ethic and hours. Can you share a little bit about how he worked? Some of the nights he'd be out and be in 2 in the morning and be in the office at 8. I mean, what are just some of the characteristics about Murl you'd share with us?
Well, he was, as you say, he was a hard worker, and he expected everybody that worked for him to be a hard worker. And his men that he hired, with the exception of the first one, and who did not last very long, were good workers. He started out by himself in the office. The office was in the north end of the original student union, and then when the wing was built on, of course, the office moved. But in that first office, the north end of the office was occupied by the Alumni Association offices, and the south end was occupied by the Placement Bureau with Mr. Martin. And then there was a work area in the middle. And I remember there was it was known in those first days, before the name was changed, as the Former Students Association. And they had a big desk, tall desk, when you first went in the door, where alumni who visited the office could sign their names. And it said, "In books of fame, you'll write your name, OAMC." And they would sign their names when they came into the office. I remember one of the secretaries that he inherited from Mr. Martin was Nadine Powell, and she was a real fine lady who worked there in that office. And his secretaries were expected to be hard workers, and if they didn't work very hard, they didn't last very long. I remember he fired one. Well, actually, she quit. One lady that was working for him, he came in and found out that she had not processed a whole bunch. She had a whole drawer full of checks that she hadn't processed, and it had accumulated over a long period of time, and people were beginning to wonder why they were not receiving their magazine and all the other attributes that they were supposed to be getting. And so he scolded her for it and said, "You've got to stay here until you process these checks." And she just picked up her purse and walked out. But most of his secretaries knew that they had to be hard workers, and they were. And all of the men that, with the exception of the first one, were that kind of worker too. And he had some wonderful associates Leo Elwell was his first one, and he stayed with him until he became head of the central mailing. And Murl had told them they couldn't have his mailing if they didn't hire Leo to do it, because Leo knew more about mailing than anybody, because the Alumni Association sent out more letters than anybody. But anyway, Leo was excellent, and Ray Sharp worked for Murl for 13 years, and Bob Roth was excellent, and Steve Moody. All of those men were really good workers. As far as the alumni banquets are concerned, Murl went to all of them. He never missed going to the honors banquets for the students. He went to all of them, and he would have one of his men, he had 2 associates at that time, and each one of those would go to half of them, but he went to all of them.
And Elizabeth, he had done those honors banquets and the chapters meetings. He'd many times come back in at midnight or after.
And he'd be at his
work at 8 o'clock.
He'd be at his desk at 8 o'clock. And probably it it wasn't very good for his health, but cardiovascular problems ran in his mother's family. And of course, he had a massive heart attack in 1974, and his brother had died in 73 of a massive heart attack. All of his brothers had heart problems. It just ran in the family, and all of his cousins did. But he recovered. He was 23 days in the hospital, fretting all the time because he was not at his desk at the Alumni Association. He recovered, and then during the 3 years between the heart attack and open heart surgery, occasionally he would have chest pains, and Sam Ernest would slap him in the hospital. And I remember one time we were getting ready for class reunions, and he told Sam he could not go to the hospital because he had class reunions, and Sam said, "You will go to the hospital." And he had me take to the hospital his pen and ink and some parchment paper so that he could letter the deceased members of the Half Century Club for the past year. And how we happen to have that on display every year is an interesting story. Dean McElroy, who had been Dean of Veterinary Medicine and I think several other things for the university, and for which McElroy Avenue is named now, Dean McElroy came to Murl one day, and he said, "We are not going to have any more of these sad times when we talk about have a little ceremony for the people who've died during the year." He said, "I can't stand it. We're going to have to do something else." And so Murl devised the idea of having a scroll with all the names of the Half Century Club who had died during the year. And he put it on display in the Chinese lounge and put potted plants all around it in a very attractive display where they could go to it and look and see who had died, whose name was on the scroll. But then Dean McElroy was satisfied that they didn't have a ceremony about the deceased.
Now, the legend has it Murl was pretty stickler for detail. And you're on the honors banquets. Remember the pistol Pete's, the table tents he used to put up there. Did you help with set up many of those honors banquets?
Oh, yes.
Now, can you tell us about how particular it was about exactly how the Pete's had to be in a row and those kinds of things?
Oh, they had to be turned the same way toward the center of each table. They had, and he would go around and be sure that they were all, everything, the decorations were absolutely the way they ought to be. Oh, yes, he was very particular about that. And he was very particular about the programs that he took out and made them so that the students would really want to come, who were attending that would really want to come to Oklahoma State. He had really good speakers. and good films that he showed them and everything to make it very attractive for the students to want to come to Oklahoma State.
Murl was very innovative and very creative. The program that he did, and that honors banquet was one of those. Those, Elizabeth, so people understand, maybe give us a broad that they were doing how many, 50 some odd or more of those?
Yes, probably. He probably had over 50 during his last years in various counties. There's 77 counties, and sometimes the counties combined to counties that were close together. And one of the first counties that had honors banquets was K County, Ponca City. Always was one of the early ones, I remember. And then it grew and it grew, and each county, and they worked with the leadership in the counties. And one thing that he did, he always wanted to be sure that they had a good public address system where that people would be able to hear. And sometimes he'd go into counties for meetings where it didn't want to work, so he always carried in the back of the car a portable public address system that he could that ran on batteries that he could hook up so that people could hear. Yeah, that was very important. And he had this idea that a banquet shouldn't last over 2 hours. If he didn't want people to get too tired, and he wanted them to start on time, have the meal on time, and then have an hour's program, and then go home. And he was a great stickler about that. And the idea of stand up, speak up, and shut up was part of his belief, really.
Now, the chapters, the county chapters are helping sponsor these locally, give scholarships, did they not?
Yes, they did. And when they first started that, they tried to work it out so that alumni would pick up the student and take the students to the banquet, to involve the alumni with these students. And I don't know whether they continued that all the time, but they did that at the very first. And I went to a lot of those and helped set up a lot of them, particularly in Oklahoma City and Tulsa, in some of the large ones. I didn't try to go to all of them, of course.
Some of those Oklahoma City, Tulsa were several hundred people.
Yes, we had very large banquets in Oklahoma City and Tulsa because they involved so many high schools. And so I always helped with that, and he'd take people out of his office to help set up, in addition to the local alumni. But the local alumni were always very deeply involved in all of these banquets, and they were proud of them. They were really proud of, and then they were proud when they found these students were signing up to go to Oklahoma State. And I really believe that all those banquets helped increase our enrollment at Oklahoma State. I think there's no question about it.
Russell Conway did.
Because our enrollment really increased during the time that these banquets were really going strong.
Changing subject, more kind of your personal recollection. What are some? You must have many special moments, special memories of Oklahoma State University. Could you share some of your highlights and your personal memories about Oklahoma State?
Well, as I said, I became quite close to the alumni. I always hosted the women, the wives of board members. Sometimes we took trips. I remember one time I had arranged for a bus to take us to Wool Rock, to take the wives to Wool Rock while the men were having the board meetings. And of course there were some women on the board at that time too. But the wives, we went, and I remember one time I arranged for Brian Thompson to take us around and show us the landscaping on the campus. And he encouraged the people I know to pick up acorns from the pin oak trees, and he told them they could just stick that acorn in the ground and that acorn would grow into a pin oak, I remember. And he was the landscape person, and the campus was always beautiful. during the time that we had the alumni meetings in the spring. It was always beautiful. But I became very close to all of the alumni, and I had open house after all the football games here in my house. And I never knew how many people were going to come by, and I fed them a meal. I worked and prepared. I had casseroles, I had chicken tetrazzini, I had various things that I never knew how many people were going to come to my house after the game, and often alumni would come after the game, drop by. And sometimes they'd bring their friends, people that I didn't even know. But Murl and I always had open house and we welcomed people. I stopped that after Murl retired and just had it here for family, but I quit cooking. But I spent the day before getting ready for open house after all the games, and they enjoyed coming to our house. We never served anything alcoholic. Even the drinkers knew that when they came to my house, they were going to get Cokes or lemonade or something like that. Because Murl was quite a stickler on being opposed to alcohol. But so we never offered them that. But they didn't expect it. They respected his feelings on the subject. And he never served alcohol at any of his meetings.
Elizabeth, how do you feel about recent activities or current activities, that things are going on at the campus?
Well, I'm not very close to what's going on at the campus. I rarely go to the campus except for athletic events anymore. So I really don't know too much about what's going on. Of course, I have a student always with our presidential scholarship, you know, and that has grown from the 33,000 now to over 100,000 that fund has with the investments and so forth. And eventually maybe I'll be able to support 2 students, but it just keeps growing. And I always meet with my student. Sometime the foundation always sees that I meet with my student sometime during the year, and that's been a very fine thing. But I just don't make it to the campus. I still buy football, basketball, and baseball tickets. I still go to games, even though I don't see very well anymore. And when I go to basketball and football, I take radio with earphones so that I know exactly what's going on, because I can't see that well. But it's wonderful to be with the crowd and be with the group, and I still feel a part of it. As I said, I feel that I married it. I'm proud of the university, and I feel that it's doing well, and I have a great interest in it still, certainly, and always will. I was able to attend the centennial meeting of my own college this year, their 100th anniversary, and that was interesting. And I was glad to be there for that. But I really feel quite a part still of this university, and I have a great interest in it still.
Elizabeth, gosh, I'd say Murl was the longest serving alumni director.
Yes, if you'd stayed 2 more years, you would have caught up with him.
I almost had him. And then of course, the alumni director, A.O. Martin, Archie O. Martin, before Murl, was 23 years, I think. 23 and a half.
I don't know how long Mr. Martin was, but I will say this for the Martins. They were absolutely wonderful to us when we came to Stillwater. Mrs. Martin took me under her wing. I never belonged to newcomers because Mrs. Martin took me to Lahoma. She took me to her bridge club. She took me to her book club. She introduced me all around the town. And I remember one time she introduced me as the wife of the alumni director, and this woman turned to me and she said, "Yes, but what does your husband do for a living? And I was so shocked because he was working at least 18 hours a day. And I said, well, that's what he does for a living. That's a full-time job.
Did they ever ask you, what does he do in the summer?
Well, in the summer, of course, every 2 years we were, after 1962, we were traveling, with the alumni. And we not only went on international tours, we were on all the continents except Antarctica. We had extensive trips around the world. We were in South America. We had a trip to South America. We were on the South American continent twice. And then we also took cruises, took groups on cruises, and we went on many cruises. Our first cruise was a Big 8 cruise, where the Big 8 directors were invited to go. And that was interesting because we were on the ship with all the other Big 8 directors. Murl had a very good relationship with the other Big 8 directors. And when we first came here, he had an excellent relationship with the director at OU. And that was why he was able to work with him so well in the organization of the Alumni Council. He was a very fine director. And as I said, Mr. Vineyard, too, was one of the he was president of one of the colleges, and he was real active in the organization of that, too, as well. But our international trips were absolutely wonderful. Murl took bids for them, and he was able to get really good prices. Our first trip around as I told you, the first trip was $750. That was a chartered airplane. Then we went around the world, and that first trip was $1,995 for 30 days around the world. And we stayed in Hilton hotels, every place there was a Hilton. Wonderful hotels, beautiful hotels, and 3 meals a day. And that was really great. And where there was not a Hilton hotel, we stayed in the finest hotels, that were available. He told me one time, he said, I've taken you to some of the finest hotels in the world. And I said, yes, and to some of the worst ones, too. And I remember one that we stayed in Cambodia, out at Siem Reap, just outside of Angkor Wat. That was a terrible, low class, by American standards, motel. I remember the bathtub didn't have a stopper, and all kinds of big insects came up through the drain. But it was worth it to get to go to Angkor Wat. And Cambodia had only 2 airplanes at that time. And we flew into Cambodia in those airplanes. They were small airplanes. But then the government confiscated them while we were there, and we were stranded. We didn't know how we were going to get out. And we did not have diplomatic relations with Cambodia. The United States did not at that particular time. The war at Vietnam was going on. We could even see the flashes of the guns from Cambodia. So anyhow, the Cambodian people are wonderful people, nice, gentle, wonderful people. And fortunately, Mrs. Kennedy had been there shortly before we were there, and they were all talking about Mrs. Kennedy. Every place we went, Mrs. Kennedy, she speak very fine French. And they did everything they could, and they got us on Malaysian Airlines, and we got out of Cambodia into Singapore a day early. But anyway, we had some interesting experiences along the way. But it all worked out. It all worked out. And I remember one time uh, the company that we were dealing with on our trip around the world wasn't going to let us check into a hotel because the the travel company had not paid the bill for the previous tour. But anyway, it all worked out, and we got in without any trouble. Murl was a pretty good talker, and he was able to see that it was done. And they honored our vouchers, and we were able to check in. And I remember one time they took some of our bags. Our bags went on out to the Mena house at the pyramids in Egypt instead of being at our hotel in Cairo. And some of our people did without their bags that night, but they came in the next morning. But we never lost any bags, and we never lost any passengers, and everything was fine. We never had any real difficulties on any of our trips, and people seemed to enjoy them and have a wonderful time. I wouldn't take anything for having been a part of those alumni trips.
Elizabeth, a quarter century of service to Oklahoma State University. How would you hope people remember you and Murl and the Murl Elizabeth Rogers era at Oklahoma State University?
Well, I hope so many of the ones that we knew and that worked with us are gone. I want to give you a list of some of the survivors that are still alive that could tell you about some of those years. And Dean Stringer in Oklahoma City was one of, Murl knew him from the time that he was a student. Ken Mitchell over in Logan County. And those are two that I think of. I think of so many prominent people like Pete Bartlett that worked so much with the Alumni Association, and I think his sons are still active. Yeah. And you're now seeing the second generations of a lot of these people that worked with Murl. And of course, Mel and Mary Jones were very outstanding. Glenn Yon just recently died. Glenn was a wonderful MC at any kind of banquet. He was just funny, he was clever, and it looked like he was just shooting off the hip, but he had prepared it very carefully. Scott Orbison was, as I said, important, very important in the Alumni Association from the time he was in Enid and later when he was in Tulsa. I could just, and Frederick Drummond, you could meet with Frederick Drummond now. Frederick was always very supportive and of such a fine person, and he was descended from Gentner Drummond, who was on the Board of Regents when we first came here. We knew so many of the regents too. Murl worked very closely with a lot of the regents, and we were in the homes of a lot of the regents from time to time. And he had a very close association with regents as well as alumni board members.
So again, as you always do, you're talking about casting credit to others, but how about Elizabeth and Murl Rogers? How do you want them to be remembered? How do you think they'll be remembered?
I hope they will remember Murl as one who loved his work. He loved Oklahoma State University, and I said he had three loves: his family, his church, and Oklahoma State University. And it would be hard to know which he put first. Sometimes I felt like he was putting the university first. But I went along with him, whatever he wanted to do, and I tried to help him in every way and be supportive. And our children understood that. They knew that he was going to be gone a lot. And they accepted it. They accepted it. And In fact, he involved our whole family. He'd have all of the ones that were old enough up at the office stuffing letters at night. How many times we did that. Sometimes he'd bring home great big boxes of envelopes and we'd sit in the living room and stuff letters. You know, he involved the whole family. Actually, we were all a part of the Alumni Association. It was understood. It was our life. It was just absolutely our life. And so I think most of the alums who knew us will remember us fondly because we tried to know the alumni, and we liked them personally. We really liked them. Murl did so many things that other people might hire other people to do. He was a very good artist. He did his own lettering. He made his own signs, and they looked professional because he was a very good artist. And he had so much ability in so many ways, and he wasn't afraid to work. He didn't seek credit for himself. He always wanted to put his presidents and his leadership forward. And it was his hope to remain in the background. But I think most of them knew who was really doing most of the work. And they appreciated him. And as I said, I don't remember his ever having any controversy with any of his board members or any people that he worked with. He seemed to like them, and I think they liked him. And as I said, he had a good relationship with the presidents and with the deans and the vice presidents always. And so I hope that his legacy will stand for many years, and certainly a lot of what the Alumni Association is doing today is what he established, is what he brought into being. And he was not seeking credit for it, but he was just looking for something that would be good for the university and for the alumni. And he felt that alumni were important. And he always felt that the Alumni Association should stand alone and be strong from now until eternity, as far as he was concerned. That he believed in it from the very beginning and loved it every day that he worked for the Alumni Association, and even until the day he died. He was, until he died in March of 1989, he was still attending all the sporting events, even to the ones that he had to go in his little cart, mobile cart, that he rode to football games and to baseball games. You know, he was still climbing the stairs to go to the upper deck of the field house the week before he was stricken the last time. He never gave up, never gave up. Always felt a part of OSU and loved it till the day he died.
Part of the rest of the story is how the Alumni Association felt about Murl. He was the first ever person designated as a life member of the board of directors of the Alumni Association when he retired.
Really?
And he attended the meetings regularly and faithfully. Everyone, when I came on board, 85, he was there for those 4 years, there all the time. But I thought that was very fitting.
Well,
they made him a life member.
Well, that was wonderful, and I appreciate the fact that I was given a life membership to the Alumni Association, even though I did not have 1 hour of credit from Oklahoma A&M or from OSU. But as I said, I always felt that I married it. It was a part of my life. It still is, and it always will be. But I'm just I have loved living in Stillwater. It came to us at a wonderful time. We knew that we had all these children to send to college, and certainly they took advantage of the opportunity. They always knew where they were going to college. I remember he told Ruth Ann when she graduated from high school that she could go any place she wanted to, but if she wanted to eat, she'd go to Oklahoma State University. And that stood for all of us. And I remember when he told Charles that he thought he should go to the University of Oklahoma for his law degree. And that surprised a lot of people. But he said, if you're going to practice law in Oklahoma, I think you need to go to OU. And he did. But he still has orange blood. It never turned red while he was down there.
Talking about family tradition, you mentioned that Paul was on the board of directors of the Alumni Association and was on the executive committee, one of 7 members of the executive committee.
Yes.
Very, very engaged and involved in the Alumni Association and Oklahoma State University for many, many years.
Yes, and he would be now if he weren't in California, I guess. It's just a long distance operation. But he still holds basketball tickets and football tickets, even though he doesn't get to come to very many games. And all of our children are very supportive of Oklahoma State and keep up with all of the activities, even those that don't live here. They follow the football and basketball and sporting programs, and everything that goes on here, they're very interested in. They're very interested in. And it's a family tradition. It's a part of our family.
Elizabeth, it's been wonderful. Is there anything we've left out? I mean, anything you think of you'd like to share with us to someone maybe viewing this 5 or 10 or 20 years now, something you want to say that maybe I forgot to ask or didn't ask?
Well, I told you I made a list of some of the people that you might want to talk to, and I don't know whether you want to turn that off. And he was living in Bennett Hall, and about his early days with Cliff, and he had a really good relationship with Cliff when he was the football coach, and they were working closely together. He immediately got involved in the athletic program because he knew that was important to alumni. It just is important to alumni. And they can say that as much as they say that athletics are not important, but they are. And that's one way that you hold your alumni people's interest is with the athletic program. And I'm sorry that they're pricing the athletic tickets out of the range of a lot of people now. I got my basketball ticket order, and I was really upset about it this year. Last year, I still buy 2 basketball tickets. And my basketball tickets last year, I paid $878 for 2 tickets. This year, they went up to $950 for 2 tickets. And then on top of that, last year I paid $1,000 for the bonus, for the privilege of going to basketball. This year it went up to $1,500 for the privilege of going for 2 tickets to go to basketball, because I still buy 2 tickets. So I'm in the process of trying to move my seats. And I don't know what I'm going to get or whether I'll even be able to move them or not. But I pay $800 bonus for football seat tickets, and I don't remember what I paid for the tickets, but did
Ron know Mr. Iba very well?
Mr. Iba was wonderful. Mr. Iba was a gentleman. He was the nicest man. He every time he'd meet me, he was so courteous and interested and nice. I had a lot of respect for Mr. Iba, and Murl did too. And as I said, we went to basketball, and we went to some out of town games, especially OU. I remember we went down when Eddie and Mel Wright were playing, and Roy Carberry were playing in that old box of a gym down at OU, and we beat them. I think Eddie got 36 points that night. I mean, even in the time when they didn't have high scores, it was wonderful. It was more fun, you can't imagine. But and I remember I was telling her, uh, we saw Oscar Robertson play when he came to the campus. We were in the Missouri Valley Conference when we came, and he was the prettiest basketball player I think I ever saw. He was so graceful on the court, and when he'd go to hit a free throw, he'd put his hands up over his head and go, shh, and it'd go in. But we won. And then Wilt Chamberlain came, and Murl gave our tickets to some alumnus that didn't have tickets. I was so mad at him. And I didn't get to see Wilt. But we won. We beat Mel Wright, had the final basket.
He gave away the tickets to that game?
He gave away our tickets to an alumnus. And he set up in the college auditorium TVs all over the college auditorium where people that couldn't get in the field house. And I had to go over there and sit in the, and he and I went over there and watched the basketball game because he'd given our tickets away to some alumnus. And it took me a while to get over that. But he had the film of that, and he took it everywhere for programs, you know, because everybody wanted to see that basketball game. So the California alumni wanted to see it. We had a club out in the Los Angeles area. So he mailed that film to them so they could have it for their program. And when it came back, the final basket, when Mel Wright's basket that won the game, had been clipped from that film. Just absolutely ruined it. I know one day Robert Allen was talking on his show about wondering if a film was available for that game, and I called him. That's the only time I ever called Robert Allen on the show. And I said, I know what happened to one of those films that we had, and told him about what happened. That some alumnus clipped that out of the film. But I remember he had a meeting in Houston one time, and he was showing a film, and I don't remember what film it was. And he got on the airplane, and he carried on the plane his projector and his film, but he checked his bag. And when he got to Houston, his bag had gone on to Panama, and he was without a suitcase. So he went up to his room. Well, first he went to the hotel drugstore, and he bought deodorant, and he bought toothpaste and a razor and a whole bunch, and shaving cream and a whole bunch of stuff. And so then he went up to his room, and he took off all of his clothes, and he sprayed all of his underwear and everything with the deodorant, and took a shower and put it back on and went to his meeting. And when he shaved the next morning, he was used to an electric razor, and he cut himself several times with the razor. And when he got off the plane, he had cuts on his face. And I said, what in the world happened to you? And he told me, you know, what happened to him. Well, the bag finally showed up in Stillwater. It came back. He got it back. But that was funny. It was really funny.
Elizabeth, anything else we missed? It's been great. Enjoyed it. Anything else you can think of?
Well, I told you about you know, all the travels and all of the things. He was robbed one time. The alumni office was robbed when it was in the old office there before we moved into the office that you were familiar with, when it was in the original office, they were missing things out of the alumni office. And so Leo was working for Murl at the time, and they decided to run shifts and turn out all the lights in the office, and one of them would be in the office in the dark because it had been broken into several times, or they were missing things out there, and it wasn't broken into because whoever got in had a key. And so Leo ran the early shift, and Merle took the late shift, and it was after midnight, and he heard the key in the door, and a black janitor came in, and Merle accosted him, and he said, "Where'd you get that key?" Because he wasn't the janitor that was supposed to even work there at all. And he said he found it under an ashtray in the card room upstairs. And anyway, he was, they, I think, arrested him, and he was the one that had stolen the money out of the Alumni Association. But of course, then Abe was running the student union, and Abe got rid of him without any trouble. But that was the only time that I think they were ever robbed that happened. But they decided they'd just catch him, whoever it was that was doing it. I don't think they kept much money in the Alumni Association at that particular time because most of their money came in checks. But the big things, were, of course, class reunions were very important during that time, and we would have big crowds in the ballroom, for the big alumni banquet. All the different classes, 10-year intervals, they'd start coming back after 10 years. And then the big deals were the 25-year and the 50-year. I don't know whether you did any of that in your.
We did. Well,
you did.
25. You used to have your 5-year, 5, 10, 15, 20. We were doing, I think, 25 and 50 and half century club.
But the half century, and then of course a lot of the old ones died off. We had a Rocky Mountain Club that met in Denver, and Dr. Stiles, who was one of the class of 1905 or something like that, one of the very early classes, he had an MD, a PhD, and a Doctor of Veterinary Medicine. He was all three, and he grew up in Cushing. But anyway, he was one of the very early graduates, and he organized that Rocky Mountain Club up in Denver. And even when Ruth Ann and Jerry lived in Denver, they used to go to the meetings. And he and Miss Stiles ended up in a nursing home, but he kept that Rocky Mountain Club going for a long time, and it was very important. And we had a club in Washington, D.C., and up in that area. And we had a meeting. I remember we had a meeting out at the University of Maryland. Well, it wasn't. We had it in the backyard of an alumnus that was living there, and had a meeting up there one time. And Merle and I went to that. And we had a New York club, and we went to the World's Fair in I can't remember whether it was 64 or 68. It was right after we got back from a trip around the world that we went. It must have been 64, because when we were in Rome, we'd been around the world, and when we were in Rome, the Pietà was all covered with they'd boxed it up, so they were building the seats for Pope John the 23rd's ecumenical conference, and we didn't get to see the Pietà. And so then we had a meeting in New York while the New York Fair was going on, and Merle and I went up there to it, and they had brought, this might have been in 68, 4 years later, and they brought the Pietà to the United States. And I'll never forget how it looked. They had it with velvet behind it, and that white marble. It was the most beautiful thing that I think I ever saw. and we got to see the Pietà in New York at the World's Fair. And they had a moving sidewalk that went around it. And we stayed on that sidewalk and went around it 2 or 3 times so that we could really, really see it. We had seen a lot of Michelangelo's work, the Boses and the Sistine Chapel and all of that, but to get to see the Pietà, we got to see it. We didn't miss it. But anyway, that was wonderful. But we had a really good club up in New York at that particular time. But Murl got to the place where it didn't seem feasible to try to. It was too expensive to try to keep contact with a lot of these clubs that were far away. When Murl retired, the Tokyo alumni sent us. I'll show you what they sent us. I don't have it out right now, but
We'll just, Elizabeth, it's okay if you would just go ahead and conclude unless you think something else. So this concludes the interview.
yeah, that completes the interview.